oh, we're Taliban 2.0. You can trust us now. You can have us as your diplomatic partner. Yeah, bullshit.
Afghanistan.
Mhm.
Where do you want to start?
Let's start with whose fault it was. Okay.
Wait, whose fault? What part was? We got to be clear.
Let's not go back to the 1870s. Now you're bringing in the Tsarist army and the British army. But no, let's talk about the Taliban takeover in 6.5 minutes. Everybody that I was reading was saying, oh no, the Afghan army will last 6 months. They're capable. They have American equipment, American trained. Blah 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 blah. I worked in intelligence, right, for 32 years here in Canada. Signals intelligence, human intelligence. I lost access to intelligence when I retired in 2015. So I have access to the same open sources that you do. And I've been following Afghan news pretty regularly since that time. I'm tweeting and reporting on Taliban attacks daily in Afghanistan since 2015. Daily. And often multiple attacks. So, the Taliban are whittling away here and there. They're being very careful that they're not whacking U.S. soldiers because that would, invite a credible response. But they're whacking Afghan army, Afghan police, Afghan civilians. So when all these people said, "Wow, the Afghan army is doing a fine job," I'm saying, well, where's the evidence for that? And so when they rolled over everybody in a matter of like nanoseconds, I wasn't surprised at all. And that's based solely on open source. So what the intel was saying, I have no idea. What the NSA was saying, the CIA, their allies, whatever kind of thing. I don't have access to that, but
there's two stories that I've heard for this. So the first story seems a little juvenile, but almost believable. And the idea is that everybody that came out of Afghanistan, all the generals, were too scared to say that it's fucked up because everybody prior to them said that things were going fine. So they're kind of like, if I say everything is fucked up, I'm kind of rocking the boat. It looks like I fucked up. Now, I've heard that. That seems a little bit kind of like out of a movie, but maybe part of that. The second thing that I've heard, and I keep getting this pushback, I keep making the same argument, and then I keep getting the same pushback, and it keeps giving me pause. So my feeling was like, I feel like we should have had a process to get these people out earlier. But then everybody will ask me, or more intelligent people will ask me, they'll be like, okay, how the fuck does it look if the United States says that they're going to leave in 6 months and they're going to have an extra special expedition process to get all the visa people out? Like, what kind of a message does that send to the current ANA? And it's like, yeah, fuck, I guess so. Like, fuck. It seems like you kind of just had to like unplug the airport and leave at night. Maybe I don't know, but it seems like a horrible situation no matter what. What do you think about that? Yeah, go.
Okay, yeah. I'll address the first one first. So there's no question that intelligence is what intelligence is. We gather information, we assess it for how true it is, we corroborate multiple sources, and we present our best analysis on what's happening in X, Y, or Z, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, you fill in the blank kind of thing. Just because your analysis says something doesn't mean your political masters are going to follow it. There's a whole bunch of agendas going on here. And there's no question under the Trump administration, he wanted to get the fuck out of Afghanistan ASAP.
Yeah.
Right? And that was his number one goal. Like, we're leaving no matter what. I don't give a shit what happens. We're leaving.
And he negotiated as much as well, which some people don't remember that in May, right, we were supposed to be gone by then. That was what they'd agreed with the Taliban. And then Biden backed that up to September,
Yeah. Well, let's back up. The fact that he was talking to the Taliban, which I don't know about your country, Stephen, but in Canada, they're a listed terrorist entity, gives me the willies just thinking about that. But anyhow, so there are multiple agendas going on here. And my guess is, from what I've heard from former colleagues with the Bureau and NSA, people I'm still friends with over the years, because Canada and the United States are pretty close, there's a lot of disillusionment and frustration and sadness at the fact that, at least during the Trump administration, I can't speak for Biden, intelligence was ignored because it didn't fit the agenda, right? And so you could be painting the most accurate picture possible. At the end of the day, if the powers that be don't want to hear it, they're going to ignore it. So again, I don't know what the intelligence picture was, but I'm thinking it was pretty accurate, and yet for whatever reason it was ignored. Your point about generals not wanting to rock the boat, well, that's political too, right? Because if you're the one guy that says Afghanistan's going down the shitter tomorrow, and all your predecessors said, no, this is rainbows and unicorns, what does that do for your promotional abilities down the road? So I think there's that as well. The other thing about evacuees is really interesting, because we're getting a lot of criticism here north of the 49th too in Canada about the Liberal government's inability to get out people that helped us, and they're dying. They're being either being imprisoned or tortured or dying. I'm working with a lot of people up here, former military, former intelligence, who are busting their asses trying to get people out of Afghanistan. We've had some successes, but the government dropped the ball big time on this one. They claim they did everything they can. Bullshit. They dropped the ball big time. But you're right. If we had said Afghanistan is a bed of roses, but we're going to get everybody out 6 months before, we're sending mixed messages. So I think the bottom line is that it was a clusterfuck on September the 12th, 2001. It's a clusterfuck 20 years later. And irrespective of what you, the Americans, Canadians, NATO, S4, whatever force you want to name, no matter who did what, chances of success were minimal at best. And this should teach us a big thing about, sending military forces en masse, because it didn't work in Iraq. I just read a report by the Kurds. ISIS has carried out 5,000 attacks in Kirkuk in the past 4 years. 5,000 attacks in 4 years by ISIS, which Donald Trump told us was totally defeated back in 2019. So, I don't want to be overly critical of people. That's not my shtick. But I think there was a lot of political overtones to this that really probably trumped, no pun intended, the intelligence that was coming in.
Can you, when you said 5,000 attacks over in where? Were these the Kurdish people? Is that in Iraq or? In
northern Iraq. So basically, Kirkuk is kind of the nominal capital of so-called Kurdistan.
Okay.
So Kurdish forces, they bore the brunt of a lot of what ISIS was doing. For the past 4 years, since 2017, 5,000 attacks by ISIS. Now, some are just, they blow up an electricity pylon. Maybe they let off an IED. I don't know how many casualties it's resulted in, but that shows me that ISIS sure as shit hasn't disappeared off the face of the earth. Not in northern Iraq, anyhow. But again, it goes back to 9/11, and we declared a war on terrorism, and people have been saying for decades, you don't declare wars on common nouns. How's the war on poverty going in your country, by the way? How's the war on drugs?
Yeah, slightly worse than the war on drugs, I was going to say, yeah. Or I guess slightly better than the war on drugs, but yeah.
Well, maybe. But the bottom line, if you declare, someone said very famously, just after 9/11, it was an American scholar in Paris, said, when you declare a war on common nouns, there's a problem because common nouns don't surrender. You can declare a war on Iraq because Iraq can surrender, or a war on Germany in World War II.
It's funny because
common nouns don't surrender.
I think there's a small piece of personal advice that actually applies on like an international level, which is a piece of personal advice you'll get is if you make goals in your real life, it's important to make those goals small and achievable, because if you have a grand goal, it wears you down, you're not as motivated, and you'll lose track of what's going on. And yeah, it feels like lack of clear mission is a big problem with some of the foreign affairs that we get ourselves involved in the United States.
Absolutely. And it's not just you Americans in Iraq and in Afghanistan. The French have been in the Sahel and sort of the kind of Sahara desert now for the past 6 years. Terrorism in Mali, Niger, Central African Republic, Burkina Faso is still going on. Nigerian military has been active against Boko Haram and Islamic State Western African Province for the past 10 years. That's still going on. Ethiopian forces invaded Somalia in 2005 to defeat Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab's carrying out weekly attacks in Somalia. They're just trying to interrupt their election. So, I'm not anti-military. I mean, I have no bones, but you can't see this as primarily a military function. It's primarily a security, intelligence, law enforcement function. Those are the guys that should be doing your counterterrorism.
So if I could ask, where does ISIS reside now? So they were fully pushed out of Iraq.
Everywhere.
Where is they have to have some. So my understanding was 2013 onwards, it was the oil fields that they ran in Syria that's where they got all their money and support from. They sold they trucked it up to Turkey. They sold it to the Kurds. They sold it in Iraq. So where are they now that they've been pushed out of Iraq? My understanding is that Syria, the oil fields no longer are run by ISIS. Are they? Where do they get their money from? Where do they live? Where do they exist?
That's a really good question. I'm going to answer in a couple of ways. First of all, they still exist in Iraq and Syria, not with the so-called caliphate, right? They had a geographical footprint in Syria and Iraq. They called it the caliphate, and they ran it. And like I said, they had oil, they had smuggled antiquities, they had art, they had hostage taking, they had all kinds of shit they were making money from. The bottom line is that terrorist groups don't need a lot of money because terrorism's not expensive. It's expensive to run a caliphate, but it's not expensive to carry out attacks. IEDs cost, $1.25 to make? And guns are ubiquitous in places like Syria and Iraq because of the various wars. So money's not the big issue here. I mean, it's important to worry about terrorist financing, and I have colleagues that have done that. In fact, I'm interviewing a guy in a few weeks who used to do terrorism financing here in Canada. So it's important, but terrorism is not an expensive procedure. So ISIS is still present in Iraq and Syria. They've got at least 20 so-called provinces or affiliates throughout Africa, throughout Asia, throughout the Middle East. And these are people that, like ISIS and Khorasan, we heard a lot about them, right? Those are the guys that blew up Kabul airport. during the evacuation. ISIS in Khorasan has been around since what, 2016?
Gotcha. So,
Mostly a bunch of it.
if I understand this, then, so ISIS is no longer like ISIS used to be a centralized group with a clear
Correct.
leadership structure, with a clear funding structure, big missions. But now it sounds like it's more like a ton of different kinds of little groups that almost like, I don't want to say like Antifa because it's not the same, but it's not like an actual coherent organization as much anymore. Yeah.
Well, they do. I mean, there is a leader still. I forget who it is now. I mean, after Baghdadi got killed, I mean, that was a blow to the organization. But I mean, the problem with killing leadership is that you're playing whack-a-mole. I mean, Bin Laden finally got bit it in 2011 in Abbottabad. Ayman al-Zawahiri took over. Ayman al-Zawahiri's got the personality of a dead cat. Like he's not as charismatic as Bin Laden, but Al Qaeda's still around. But it's around in a different way than it was on 9/11. And you're right, it's not as maybe the organizational structure. You don't have an org chart with the head of finance and the head of health and safety, whatever kind of thing. But most terrorist groups don't operate that way. They're a ragtag bunch of people that subscribe to an ideology. They find a place to function, whether it's jungles of Philippines or in Puntland in Somalia or northeast Nigeria or in Mozambique, where an Islamic State affiliate is beheading people in northeastern Mozambique. So, you don't need that kind of. I mean, these aren't states. I mean, the caliphate was a bit of an anomaly that we hadn't seen that before. And in some ways, that was kind of a mistake because when you say this is our territory, well, guess what? We're going to bomb the shit out of it.
You can be attacked. Yeah, you're much more vulnerable.
Yeah. Whereas if you bleed into the background, which is what the Taliban did after the U.S. and NATO invasion in 2001, the Taliban just bled back into the countryside or went to Pakistan. I had to laugh. The Pakistani head of the ISI, their intelligence service, just went to Kabul, talked to the Taliban. He said, everything's going to be okay. Yeah, because you've been supporting the Taliban since 2001, so of course it's going to be okay for you. But I think, smart terrorist groups, I'm not giving advice to I'm not a terrorism supporter, but smart terrorist groups don't do stupid shit like create caliphates. They exist in the background. They carry out attacks whenever they want.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
So the problem for Afghanistan now is what are we going to see? And a lot of predictions. To me, bottom line is the Taliban are probably the same characters we've seen for the past 20 years. They are misogynist. They are hateful fuckers. They don't like the Shia. They don't like Sufis. They don't like anything. Will they be as brutal as they were in terms of girls' education and women in the workforce? I'm already seeing signs that's probably true. They're painting a pretty, anodyne face to the world. Oh, we're Taliban 2.0. You can trust us now. You can have us as your diplomatic partner. Yeah, bullshit. I mean, the Taliban are the Taliban. And will it be as dumb as to give basis to groups like Al Qaeda and Islamic State? That remains to be seen. But, an interesting thing that no one's talking about, and I'm really kind of curious, are we going to see the wave of foreign fighters that we saw in the mid-2010s to ISIS? A lot of Canadians, Americans went to fight for ISIS because of the caliphate. Now the Taliban have taken over Afghanistan. We're going to see another wave of foreign fighters like we saw when they took over in the early 90s after the Soviet withdrawal. I don't have an answer to that question. But if I'm a security service, if I'm the FBI or CSIS or MI5, that's on my agenda. How many Westerners will see this now as the place to go because the Taliban have taken over? That would be really, really worrisome.
So in that region of the world, so if I'm thinking, I don't know anything about like Turkmenistan or Uzbekistan, I think is the one north of that.
Yeah.
So with Iran to the west and Pakistan to the south, what would you go to Afghanistan to fight for? What's like a conflict around there? Because my understanding, and I don't know our relationships 100% of these, but my understanding is like the ANA was basically like this little beacon of American loyalty in what is more or less a sea of incredible anti-American hostility. So with the ANA disappearing to the Taliban, what is there like a regional conflict there? I know that Pakistan has conflicts with India and China, but is there anything there that we're concerned with, I guess, or?
Yes and no. I think certainly there. I mean, obviously, what's happening in Xinjiang province in China. You've got a group called the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, which has been they've been in the area for a long time. The Uyghurs. You have the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, the IMU, has been in Afghanistan for decades. I don't see them necessarily going to Afghanistan to take part in a conflict per se. Although, with what the Hindu nationalist government of Modi in India is really pissing off a lot of Muslims. What's happening in Kashmir, what's happening in the Punjab, and all these things are pissing off a lot of people. What I think is realistic to expect is a lot of people will say, well, we can go to Afghanistan, we can train, we can get material, we can get guns, we can get all kinds of stuff, we can get the knowledge that we can take back to our countries or pay it forward to countries like China and India and the West in general to start blowing up shit there. So it's not so much that Afghanistan serves as sort of the locus of the actual, conflict zone, but it serves as kind of like a university for jihadi groups like it did in the 1990s and 2000s.
What is like the obsession? I guess I know a little bit about the conflict, but why does India really want that contested region, the Jammu and Kashmir stuff? Why are they so? My understanding is that the last major thing that happened is like Modi said it was okay for Indians to move in and start buying property and shit, basically, which is pissing off a lot of people. But why? What is the Indian like for Xinjiang? Fuck, I always fuck it up. The big northwest place in
Xinjiang,
in China. Like, there's supposed to be a whole bunch of resources there. I'm not condoning it, but I understand why the Chinese government would want to like genocide those people and move them out so that they can access those lands. What does India want with the Kashmir region?
I'm not an India expert by any stretch of imagination, but from what I understand, it goes back to partition. And so when under the former British Raj, we had the creation of Pakistan and India, 1947 was it, I think? And that area was kind of left contested. So is it going to be Muslim? Is it going to be Hindu? The population was mixed. And I believe at the time, if memory serves me correct, there was a local leader who couldn't make up his mind. He wanted to, some kind of sultan or something, wanted to retain independence from either of the new countries. So the area has been up in the air for a very long time. And under the Modi government, the Modi government is the most Hindu nationalist government I've seen in a very long time in India. And so much to the point, you're actually seeing Hindu terrorism against Muslims and against Christians. I wrote a whole, the book that I wrote back in 2019, When Religions Kill, has a whole chapter on Hindu terrorism. And Hindus, there are Hindu terrorists in India, and their victims are largely Muslim. It's this notion that India is for Hindus only, and the rest of you can go fuck off. So I think that given the contested area under partition, you've got a lot of Hindu nationalists say, no, that's India. We're not giving this to Pakistan. This is not a Muslim land. This is a Hindu land. And if it means evacuating a bunch of Muslims, or as you said, encouraging Hindu in-migration to there, it'll be part of greater India. So this is part of the Hindu notion that we're going to be, a strong Hindu nation, and basically the rest of you can go fuck yourselves because you're not Hindu.
Gotcha. And then there's always concerns of rising tensions between the Pakistani and Indian border because they're both nuclear powers and everything, right? We don't know.
And they certainly have exchanged, missiles in the past. Thankfully, not nuclear missiles, but and Pakistan is also a complete clusterfuck, right, in terms of its governance. They're dealing with, but Pakistan's also dealing with an incredibly important and dangerous jihadi movement in Balochistan, which is in the southern part near Quetta. There are weekly attacks by a group, I think they're called some kind of Balochistan Liberation Front or something like that. They want independence from Pakistan because they want to set up a true Islamic state. They don't view the government in Islamabad as Islamic enough. So they're dealing with their own internal jihadi problem, while at the same time they supported the Taliban for decades against American and NATO forces in Afghanistan. So Pakistan's trying to play like both sides of this, and that's probably not a really, really good idea. But that's Pakistan.
So, focusing back on the Afghanistan thing, is there anything that the Biden administration could have done better to like pull out, or was it?
I don't think
is it
so.
always going to be like this?
Yeah, I think so. I think this was inevitable. Whether we pulled out in 2002 or 2022 or 2042, I don't think. I mean, you got to tip your hat to a lot of really well-intentioned people who did try to go in and, build dams and canals and irrigation systems and schools and teach democracy and all that kind of stuff. I think their hearts were in the right place, but it goes down to, we're there with our Western values and our Western culture and our Western liberal secular democracy, and we're saying to the Afghans, yeah, you should do this too. And they're going to say, well, why would I do that? I've got no history of that. This is not part of my culture. This is not part of my way of thinking. I think we were woefully naive from the get-go. And if we thought we were going to sort of create a stable state in Afghanistan, where, there's a reason why Afghanistan's been called the graveyard of empires since the 19th. In fact, you can go back to Alexander the Great, for Christ's sake. He died in Afghanistan in whatever, 300 BC, whatever the hell it was.
I think
the Russians,
the recent, especially the Afghan Civil War and then the Soviet incursions or whatever prior to that, obviously were really weird. To be fair, I'm pretty sure like if you go back, there were a lot of like Islamic conquests through Afghanistan that I'm pretty sure were fairly successful, which is why it's Islamic to this day. But over the past like 100 years, it's been pretty fucked, yeah, for sure.
But okay, you go back to those Islamic invasions, and you're right. It dates back to the early 8th century. Do you think that the methods used back then to establish power
no, they were willing to be
acceptable
way,
today?
Of course,
yeah. They would just waste you, right? I mean, basically, it's my way or the highway, and it's as Bernard Lewis famously said after 9/11, I'm right, you're wrong, go to hell. And if you don't abide by me, well, I'm just going to kill you. It's like, many empires have done that, right? Think of the Genghis Khan. I mean, he would reduce whole villages to piles of skulls if you ever, looked at him in the wrong way. And that was the method. Those were the tactics used in the 8th century. And if we were to try to use the same tactics in 2021, I think we might have a bit of opposition from our populations. So bottom line is, I don't know that there was a happy ending for Afghanistan. Again, I don't want to be over. I don't want to reject honest people who did an honest day's work to try to make a difference. But I just think that people really didn't understand what they were getting in for, and really thought naively they can make a significant difference. Yes, some people are better off for it. Yes, girls who go to school over the past 20 years. Yes, women, attain positions of power within various government ministries. But bottom line is, with the Taliban back in power, I think a lot of that's going to be called into question, and a lot of it's going to get whittled away pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So,
well.
I feel for them, but so in the wake of the attack in which the 13 U.S. servicemen died at the Kabul airport, and then of course they had a drone strike, took out apparently some senior guy in ISK, Islamic State in Khorasan. I've seen reports that other drone attacks have killed Afghan civilians, which is the problem with drone attacks, right? Again, pardon me for shameless self-promotion, but I wrote this a couple years ago. We got to stop doing this as a war, because wars end up in casualties that are not germane to what you're trying to do. Would Biden send more troops in because of to take revenge on the lives of 13 U.S. servicemen?
No, I think that's probably the benefit politically of like drone strikes now, is you can drone strike, call it even, and continue. Yeah, because
okay, call it a day.
Even like the Taliban, I imagine, right, are going to be incredibly friendly, want the U.S. to leave. I don't think they want to fuck with the U.S. on the way out, because all they want is for the United States to be gone so that they can steamroll through and do whatever. But if you start getting significant amounts of American soldiers killed in like a big attack, then shit is going to get really fucked for the Taliban.
Well, and that's why the Taliban has been really careful over the past 5 or 6 years. And I think like a dozen U.S. Soldiers have died in the past 5 years in Afghanistan. Like,
I don't know if it's high level, but it's pretty low. Yeah.
Yeah, compared to the first couple of years, right? I mean, they knew that what side their bread was buttered on, and they knew that if they took out massive amounts of U.S., that they would just invite like hellfire on them, like literally and figuratively, right?
Yeah.
And so you got to give them credit for understanding that as a terrorist group, I suppose. Yeah. The other thing that, if you don't mind, I just can we talk about New Zealand for a second? The attack in New Zealand.
The Christchurch shooting a long time ago?
No. The more recent one, the other day.
Oh fuck! What is the other day?
Okay, so 2 days ago, a guy went into a shopping mall in Auckland, which is the biggest city in New Zealand, in the North Island. I've been to New Zealand many times when I was at security service, and he pulled out a knife and he wounded 6 people. No one died, to the best of my knowledge. And he was the police were there. They showed up and they shot him dead. It turns out he was an ISIS supporter.
Interesting.
This is where it gets really interesting. So the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service, NZSIS, equivalent of kind of the FBI, kind of CSIS in my country, had put this guy on a list back in 2016. He was Sri Lankan. He got to New Zealand, I believe, in 2010. Sri Lankan Muslim, who because of again what Sri Lankan Buddhists of all people were doing against Sri Lankan Muslims. And I got a whole chapter on Buddhist terrorism, which should be an oxymoron, but it's not, in Sri Lanka. He radicalized to violence, became an ISIS supporter. The security service had him on their radar, had him under surveillance, kind of thing. Learned that he was planning an act of terrorism, and here's where it gets really, really stupid. The court in New Zealand ruled that planning an act of terrorism was not enough to lay a charge. So this guy was free, under surveillance by the security service. But I can tell you, having worked with surveillance for many years, you can't surveil someone indefinitely. It's just
sure.
impossible.
So just on a clarification on that, and I'm so curious, I'll have to read it later. I wonder what did they mean when they say he was planning a terrorist attack? Because there needs to be it's like means, motive, like. Was he actually like, I am going to go here and kill these people, or was he just like, I really want to kill people at a mall, and he just said that?
I don't know that. Yeah, and that's a really good question that you asked, because you're absolutely right.
Because on one end, I could see that being very reasonable, because a lot of people, I've said things online where I'm going to go blow up this airport not like that anymore, but but it could have been also really hardcore on the other end, where it's like, what the fuck? How did you guys not cuff this dude sooner or something?
Yeah, and that's what we don't know. I don't know what the intel was saying. I mean, because New Zealand's really careful about disclosing stuff, and in fact, this guy's name wasn't even disclosed for 48 hours because of privacy laws in New Zealand. So I don't know how serious it was, but it was serious enough that the security service was following him constantly, which meant that they thought he had means and motive. Getting back to motive, the problem is nowadays the guy had a knife. He didn't have an AR-15. He didn't have a tank. He didn't have an RPG. He had a knife. I don't know about you. I keep knives in my kitchen. And so, he pulled a knife from his, the butcher block one morning, walked into this store and started stabbing people. So obviously the threat was credible from the security service perspective. What was possible legally, that's a whole other issue. But the prime minister did say they're going to revisit the law. Well, no shit, Sherlock. The horses left that barn. But the bottom line here, and this is where I'm going with this, is that intelligence may or may not have been listened to for political reasons or other. I don't know. But to me, the other point, and this is something that really is worrying me over the past couple of years, and you and I have talked. This is, I think, the fourth time I've been on your show. We've talked a lot about the far right. We can talk about what happened on January the 6th, the Proud Boys, the Boogaloo Boys, the 3%ers, all these fucking wankers. People only seem to think that in 2021, the only real threat we need to worry about is the far right threat. And there's no question. These guys, some of these guys are seriously dangerous people. We've seen attacks, there's an attack in Christchurch, the one you alluded to a couple of years ago, 2019. 51 Muslims killed at a mosque by some Australian right-wing wanker, some white supremacist, whatever the hell he was. And a lot of people are kind of ignoring the fact that, pound for pound, or kilo for kilo in my country, around the world, 99.6% of all terrorist attacks are carried out by jihadis.
Okay.
Even in the West. We saw an attack in the UK a couple years ago, that guy that was so-called de-radicalized, and he killed people on London Bridge. We've seen attacks in Berlin, in France, in Nice, you name it, kind of thing. We had a stabbing last year, a killing in Toronto. Turned out, that one kind of went under the radar. Turns out the guy was found guilty of an ISIS-inspired plot.
I think one of the really difficult things is, and it sucks too, we have issues in the United States, like when we say mass shooting, that means I think the FBI counts it as four or more people shot. Yeah. But that's not how you hear it, right? So for instance, there's a stat, there's over 350 mass shootings a year in the United States. Now, when you hear that, it's oh my God, 350 schools shut up, malls shut up. But in reality, it might just be a gang shooting and 4 people get shot.
Exactly.
Right? I think we have similar problems when we talk about terrorist attack.
Exactly.
So when you say, for instance, 99.6% are jihadists or jihadi attacks or whatever, because in Canada, something very recently that you guys have had to deal with are a whole bunch of churches being burned down because people are upset over the...
I'm so glad you raised that one.
And now do we count that as a terrorist attack? What about the incel attacks? Are they Christchurch? If that was an incel-inspired guy, I don't think he was. I think there was one in Canada where a guy ran over a bunch of people.
In Toronto, 2018.
Is that a terrorist attack or And those definitions get so political very quickly.
They do.
Yeah, because you want to call it a terrorist attack depending on the political affiliation, or otherwise you don't. And that's really, really, really difficult to do. Yeah.
This is going to sound real funny coming to a guy that worked in counterterrorism for 32 years and written 6 books on terrorism. I wish we could get rid of the word terrorism tomorrow.
Sure.
Because it's almost become meaningless. So you raised, for example, the church burning. So just for your listeners who aren't aware of it, there's been discovery of a bunch of mass graves in Canada. So we had what are called residential schools for the better part of a century, where Indigenous children were taken away from their families and put in largely Roman Catholic and also Protestant Anglican schools. They sort of Canadianize them and get them away from their culture, treat it like shit, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. And when these kids died, as a lot of them did, they were just buried in mass graves. They weren't killed, but they died of probably
tuberculosis and stuff like that.
It's smallpox, all that kind of stuff, because they probably weren't immunized, and they were buried in mass graves. Well, these mass graves are now being unearthed, which is causing a shit ton of angst and sadness, and rightfully so. This is disgusting that you wouldn't accord it, send the child's body back to his or her family for burial. So, a lot of groups are really, really angry about this. And this has led to a lot of protests, including the burning of churches, even churches that had nothing to do with the residential schools.
Yeah.
This is largely a Roman Catholic thing and to some extent Anglican. But it's the Seventh-day Adventist churches being burned in BC somewhere.
Or in some places, I think even indigenous churches, I think, were one of them.
Exactly.
And it was oh man,
So you raised the question, was that an act of terrorism? And I'll tell you, based on the Canadian law, so the Canadian Criminal Code says an act of terrorism is a serious act of violence against people or property that's carried out for political, ideological, or religious reasons, which you can imagine it's pretty broad.
Can be anything, yeah.
Exactly. So under that definition, you could state that those are acts of terrorism. Yet I never heard the T word being raised by anybody in the aftermath. I raised it, and I'm surprised I haven't been killed for it.
Yeah.
Because, the accepted wisdom is that, these are justified acts because people are angry.
Yeah.
Well, fuck, people are angry all the time. And people, you mentioned, mass shootings in the States, any more than 4 people. Yeah, the vast majority are simply people who are pissed off because the drug deal went bad, or I'm just having a bad day, or I can't get laid, or like incels or whatever, and I'm going to kill people. This is why I'm getting to the point where I don't think that terrorism as a term is serving any useful purpose. And the bottom line is that a terrorism offense generally involves an already well-established offense, like murder, or attempted murder, or conspiracy to commit murder. And I don't know about, what the United States, murder's been an offense since the Hammurabi Code of like 2000 BC in Iraq. So why is it we got to charge someone with terrorism when we can charge them with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, or first-degree murder, second-degree murder, whatever? Prior to 9/11 in Canada, there was no such thing as terrorism as a criminal offense. That came in after 9/11. We had terrorism in Canada dating back, you've put a link, I think, to my most recent book. This is a history of terrorism in Canada from Confederation, so 1867 to the present. It's available on my website because it's self-published. The first act of terrorism occurred in 1868. It was a political assassination of a father of Confederation. And the guy was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was hanged. We had Air India back in 85, which was the downing of an airliner off the coast of Ireland. Another was bombed in Tokyo. These were Sikh terrorists in Canada. They were not charged with terrorism. They were charged with first-degree murder. So we don't need terrorism legislation to find these people guilty of serious offenses. And terrorism is both easy to prove and hard to prove. So as we said, political, religious, or ideological. What does that mean?
Yeah,
it means anything.
It's one of the reasons why I don't know how it goes as much. This is a whole separate conversation. Sometimes I feel like when I look at how Canadian politics go, it feels like you guys are very much into the whipping yourselves sometimes.
Oh God, we apologize for everything.
Yeah, I know. Well, but not like even in the meme sense, but in a really bad sense. So, for instance, like Canada is like very hasty to kind of create its own definition of genocide so that it can accuse itself of genocide, but not quite, because if you do that in the UN definition, there are a whole bunch of international law things that come under. So it's like a really weird thing. In the United States, we play a lot of these games. I say play games. I actually really like how our legal system functions mostly, where when you have certain things, so like a lot of people talked about like January 6th, and a lot of people talk about like Donald Trump, and they're like, we need to charge him with incitement to riot. And I know that Donald Trump incited it with all of his rhetoric, 1,000,000%. However, the legal charge of incitement to riot, that carries with it so much potential trouble to where every public figure now needs to wonder, based on what they say, are they going to get these like insane charges? And then I feel like when you talk about the terrorist stuff too, like it opens up such a weird bag of worms when it comes to charging stuff that like, I feel really bad about it. Yeah.
So let me go through another case. About a month and a half ago, so I'm from a city called London, Ontario. It's kind of just east of Detroit, kind of between Detroit and Toronto. City of about 400,000 people. That's where I grew up. A guy ran over a Pakistani family one Sunday evening. He saw them walking down the street. He ran them over. He killed 4, wounded 1 badly. And he was caught by the cops. And he said something to the cop, basically why he did it, whether it was a hate crime or he was having a bad day, whatever kind of thing. And then a week later, the Crown, which is the prosecution in Canada, decided to charge him with terrorism. And my first question was,
is
why
every hate
is that
crime
an act of... Well, exactly. Yeah. We have hate crime in Canada. You probably have hate crimes in the States, right? Under your legal code.
I think we do.
Hate crime is a serious offense that when you target somebody for who they are or what they are, gay, black, Muslim, Jew, whatever kind of thing. And interestingly, in Canada, if you charge someone with a hate crime and he gets convicted, the judge has the sort of the latitude to extend the sentence. So if you get 10 years for assault, you get 15 because it's a hate crime. So we don't have the same latitude with terrorism.
Yeah, I think this is how it works in the U.S., where I don't think there is, I could remember, but I don't think there is a hate crime, but I think that the hate crime aspect can elevate like other charges. So if you assault somebody as a hate crime, it gets elevated.
Exactly. So this wanker in London, I don't know what was going on through his head, but I've seen nothing in the public domain that suggests that he was ideologically motivated. He may in fact have hated Muslims. Apparently they were Pakistani immigrants. They've been in Canada for years, but they dressed like they did in Pakistan, so they were very visible in terms of their religion or their culture. And for whatever reason, this guy lost his shit and he ran them over and he killed 4 of them. So getting back to our conversation, the problem with terrorism is you have to identify motive. Not the mere fact that you stabbed someone or ran them over with a car or blew shit up. Why did you do it?
And
there's a presumption of innocence, right? So the Crown and the prosecution has to say, no, Phil Gurski did this because he's an ISIS guy, or because he's a Boogaloo boy, or because he's an Antifa guy. How do you actually establish that to
That
beyond a
sounds so
reasonable
difficult.
doubt?
And you even have issues where, oh God, I hope I'm not getting this wrong, but I think there was a big Miami shooting in the United States where the guy said that he was part of ISIS and that's why he did the shooting. But I don't think that was actually credible. I think he liked ISIS, but he didn't have any official connection with them. Or
It makes you look better, right?
Yeah,
if I
sure,
can do
yeah.
this for ISIS, I'm somebody.
Yeah, and it's
Like I'm not some loser wanker from Orlando. I'm somebody because I'm part of the ISIS caliphate, the ISIS terrorist group, and I'm going to scare the living shit out of you because everyone thinks ISIS is the cat's ass of terrorism.
Yeah.
Of course, it's easy going to say that.
Yeah,
it boosts your own reputation.
There was one politician. Normally, I don't like a lot of what AOC says, but she said something really correct when it came to, I think it was the January 6th stuff, and it was every single time a new bad thing happens, what legislators want to do is more legislation. That's the solution to everything. We need more churches. And she actually said, I was very surprised with it. She said, we don't need any new laws. We have laws on the books that make a lot of this stuff illegal. Charge them for what you can and go that way instead of trying to create like a new type of charge that might fail in the future or it's just not necessary. Yeah.
And existing laws have precedent, and there's tons of case law where you can apply it.
Yeah.
Speaking of January 6th, for what it's worth, I'm sure you've done this one to death, but from my perspective, I don't see January the 6th as an act of domestic terrorism. I saw it as maybe an insurrection incited, as you said, by President Trump. I saw it probably as a riot. My bottom line, and it's interesting, I don't think anybody's been charged with terrorism under U.S. law.
No sedition. It's all just like, I think there were very few conspiracy charges, but mainly just like trespassing, indecent behavior. There was some assault and battery for the cops, but yeah.
Yeah, to me, January the 6th, bottom line, and this is going to sound dismissive, and I apologize, was a frat party gone wrong. I think a lot of these people showed up. They were incited by the former president. They had, they wanted to make a change, or whatever, take back the election, or whatever the fuck they were trying to do. They probably, were shocked as shit that they got into the Capitol.
Yeah,
they probably thought there would be security.
I think there were some people there that had bad intent going in, and I think even the FBI said as much. But they said it was like less than 5% of the people.
Yep.
And I pushed back on this a long time ago because people would ask me like, "Do you think it was a coup?" I was like, "There were a lot of people there. If they wanted that to be a coup, it would have went way different. That would have looked completely different because the Capitol Police were not ready for that event. So to call it that, yeah. And also, you got into this really weird thing, and I've gotten into arguments even with my own fans before, where they're like, anytime you do a violent act and your goal is to try to change like government policy, that's like terrorism. That's like that's basically an insurrection. And it's like, okay, well, is like every single BLM riot gone violent and insurrection then? Because you have that
anti-abortion movement.
Yeah, exactly.
If an anti-abortion rally gets violent, is that an act of terrorism?
Yeah.
A lot of these guys that they probably got in the Capitol and said, "Holy shit, we're in the Capitol. Now what do we do? Oh, I'm gonna take a selfie, or I'm gonna take a shit on Nancy Pelosi's desk or something, or I'm gonna break a window or whatever." Or that moron with the buffalo horns and the the American tattoos kind of thing. I think a lot of them were just people that were Trump supporters and had been drunk the Trump Kool-Aid that the election had been stolen, want to make a point, and all of a sudden they think, holy shit, now we're in the Capitol. Now what?
Yeah, and it's really mind-fucking because like you've got videos of these guys like taking pictures outside, like these,
and then posting them online.
But then like the next, fuck, my timelines are so fucked up with the coronavirus. But then like we juxtapose this with like a coup in Myanmar, which was tanks rolling down the fucking street. It was like completely different. And I don't know.
For those that called it terrorism, I said if this was, let's assume for argument's sake, it was an act of terrorism. This was the shittiest act of terrorism I've ever seen. Because if as you said, if your goal was to truly take over the Capitol, reverse the election results, and reinstall Donald Trump as president, you failed pretty damn miserably.
With even like the slightest amount of preparation, that there would have been way more death. There would have been,
exactly.
It was a protest turned riot with some bad actors involved. Absolutely.
Like I said, it's a frat party gone wrong. And again, this points, and it's the point you've made, and I've been making as well. We got to stop using the T word for everything. And now the problem is because this has real world consequences. So my former service, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, is probably being told, well, look more at far right actors. We just listed the Proud Boys as a terrorist group. Well, Proud Boys couldn't organize a piss up in a bar. Okay, I don't know why they're a terrorist group, but anyway, they listed them. The problem is that when you tell your security service, your law enforcement agency, well, we want you to focus on this. Well, where do the resources come from? They got to come from somewhere, because they're not getting more resources. I don't know what your deficit's like because of COVID. Ours is in the trillions because of COVID. So there's no way that CSIS and the RCMP and FBI and the CIA are getting more money anytime soon because there's no money left. We've spent it all on COVID and on the economy. So where do those resources come from? They got to come from somewhere. And I don't know, but if you've been following, but there's a lot of concern about foreign interference now in elections. We're going to the polls in 2 weeks' time to elect a government. Real concerns about cyber attacks on the election system. The integrity of the voting. The Chinese doing bad shit. The Russians doing bad shit. The North Koreans doing bad shit. So you want me to take resources away from that to look after the Proud Boys? Okay, fine, but that means I'm not going to have enough eyes and ears on the other thing, and things go badly, because resources are finite. And I think that when politicians interfere with what security services and law enforcement should be doing, that's generally not a good day. They can certainly, listen to security services and law enforcement. They can have conversations, but when they tell them to, stop doing X and start doing Y, when X is still a problem, and again, this goes back to my earlier point. I think I've got a sneaking suspicion that we have lessened the number of resources looking at jihadis in the West, because we've been told the far right.
A lot of that is probably pretty politically. I mean, a lot of the budgets are probably relatively political as well, right? Like, where are the big concerns coming from? Yeah. Exactly.
And the bottom line is you've got to do it all simultaneously. And when you work in this business, you're only as good as your last failure. Nobody cares when you get it right. They only want to point fingers when you get it wrong. I.e. Afghanistan, right? Let's blame the CIA. Let's blame MI6. Let's blame the U.S. military. When you stop something, you don't get the kudos for it, but you sure as hell get the blame when something goes bad.
Yeah. Yep. I guess we'll see. On the political side, I'm curious. I always have a dimmer take when it comes to foreign policy. I don't think Americans care. There's too much water between us and them. No. So I'm curious.
Nor do Canadians, for that matter.
Yeah. I'm curious around the election if it'll still be an issue, because this is the first time I think Biden's popularity has flipped negative. But obviously everything's in the news right now and everything. So I don't know if in a couple of years, or in 1 year, I guess, if things will still be popular or not. But I guess we'll see. Yeah.
Oh, that's for your midterms, your congressional elections. Yeah.
Which is a really, in other words,
will the Republicans regain control of the House?
Yeah, because we're already the number one legislative body we have, the Senate, is already divided completely down the half. So there's all sorts of crazy negotiations and shit.
Well, and we're going to see here in 2 weeks whether or not Trudeau is still our prime minister. He's got a minority government. He called the election, which a lot of Canadians are saying you called election because there's no need to. So a lot of anti-Trudeau feeling in this country. I see signs in rural, I live in rural Ontario, fuck Trudeau signs on people's lawns. Actual fuck Trudeau signs. So it's getting a little scary. I'm not too worried about Yahoo showing up. A few rallies were canceled out of security concern, but these are just assholes that show up because they hate Trudeau. I don't think they're really capable of any violence, to be perfectly honest, although again, I'll have access to intelligence. But we'll see what happens in 2 weeks' time, whether or not we have a new prime minister or where we go from there, and then I guess we'll see.
Yeah, it should be interesting. Are you hitting your time limit? I know you said you had hard out pretty soon.
Yeah, I got to go. My grandson turns 4 today, so we're having a little birthday party for him. But listen, this is great. It's great to touch base again. Thanks for having me on. And there's never a lack of things to talk about, my friend. It's whether it's national security or terrorism or whatever, it's the world keeps turning and things keep happening. And it's nice to have a conversation with somebody we can actually explore these things to some extent, as opposed to what I call incident analysis, where people say, "Oh, it was this, it's that." No, it's more complicated than that. So thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, have fun. Peace out. Good luck.
Okay,
bye.
Take care.